let's put ourselves in the right direction. Sort of like, in order to even take one step forward, you have to know where you're going, don't you? It's obvious. You wouldn't just walk and hope you get there. You have got to, have your goal in mind. It's very obvious, actually. But as soon as we think about it in spiritual terms and motivation, we get kind of confused. But it just means stating your goal. What's your goal? And once you know what your goal is, then every step you take has to be in that direction. Otherwise, you get lost. It's very obvious. Well, the steps we're talking about here are mental steps. It's called karma. Whatever thoughts you have. Our thoughts for the Buddha are what produce who we become, what determine the result. So therefore we state our goal, best goal, biggest one, can't get bigger, Buddhahood, your perfection. Why? Sentient beings, compassion. So we state our goal. Why we're sitting here, why we're taking this mental step today, listening to these teachings, is so that we can take some tools to achieve that goal, go in that direction, get there. And what gets us there is the motivation, the decision, I'm going to become a Buddha. Why? For sentient beings' sake. Compassion, thinking like this, and then reminding ourselves of our reliance upon the Buddha and his teachings, his methods, to help us achieve that result, help us get that goal, get there, get to where we're going. Page 7, that little prayer is expressing this idea. Sangye chadam soke choknam la janchu badu dagni kyak suchi dagi chunyen ki pe sonam ki drola peche sangye drupasho Sangye chadam soke choknam la janchu badu dagni kyak suchi dagi chunyen ki pe sonam ki drola peche sangye drupasho Sangye chadam soke choknam la janchu badu dagni kyak suchi dagi chunyen gipe sonam ki drola penche sangye drupasho. On the page before, I think, isn't it? The mandala offering.
35.
Oh, 35. That's right. 35. On there, there's a little. What we're going to do is thinking the Buddha is here himself. We're going to kind of request the teachings. So it's auspicious to offer something before receiving something, isn't it? So imagine offering him all the marvellous things of this world that beings use that make them happy. So of course that prayer is expressing the contents of the universe in terms of Buddhist cosmology, as you know that. Otherwise, don't worry, just imagine all the nice sun and moon and stars and food and sounds and lovely things. And pile them all up, offer to the Buddha. Sajipa ki jukshing metok chamri ramlingji ije padi sangye shing du mikte urwagi drokun nam dagjing la chupasho. Now imagine Buddha delightedly received our offering. Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kam Niyatayami. So as we discussed last night, Buddha's teaching, like this, is one purpose. Whether in junior school or the most advanced, postgraduate, the esoteric teachings of Buddha. Oh, I forgot. No, thank you, I forgot. Grab my microphone. So, as we talked last night, there's this, especially the way Tibetans have structured Buddha's teaching is extremely helpful over the centuries. Extremely helpful. Putting everything in a nice, orderly way. So you've got a nice, structured course from A to Z. And the goal of this course is Buddhahood. That's how you graduate, as a Buddha. So the most advanced level of that course is a course called Tantra, which is dependent upon, though, of course, which is part of the Mahayana, the compassion wing. And ability to enter into and practice that is necessarily dependent upon accomplishing, or at least, in terms of even of being ready to even enter into it, forget about getting experiences, you need to have a real clear understanding of bodhicitta, appreciation of bodhicitta. You've got to have an appreciation of emptiness. And on the basis of this, which is the first stages of practice, you must have an appreciation of renunciation. Have to. Otherwise it's meaningless. It's just nonsense. You know, you can't even say especially bodhicitta. You can, because as soon as you say especially bodhicitta, then you think of emptiness. You've got to say especially emptiness. And then you think, well, you've got to have renunciation, especially renunciation. They're all crucial, psychologically, to be able to be ready to actually utilize and get benefit from and experiences as a result of practicing Tantra. And the reason, like we said last night, the reason is because, you know, psychologically speaking, it's the most advanced of the practices. You could say the most sophisticated practices. Therefore, obviously, we know anything that's advanced and sophisticated is more difficult than the simple stuff. It's obvious. And you know very well whether it's music or football or maths, you can't possibly accomplish, you can't get your head around the difficult until you've got the simple together. It's just obvious, you know. And here we're talking psychologically. It has to be this way. So it's impossible for Tantra to make any sense unless you have even a grounding in the understanding that nothing has an inherent nature, emptiness. It's impossible. It's like a joke. Without emptiness, the idea that I can turn into a Buddha is a nonsense, is a superstition. And then without bodhicitta, you have no basis for wanting to do it. It becomes, because it's dealing with you know, one way of talking about Tantra, as we talked last night, is that it's an approach that enables a person who is qualified to utilize all the junky parts of our mind, which initially is a curious, weird idea to us. We can't get our head around this, you know. So unless you have some grounding in bodhicitta, that's a nightmare. That could be a nightmare. And unless you've got renunciation, which is an appreciation of the nuts and bolts of Buddha's teachings, which is that you have a mind that's yours, it comes from the past, and everything in it is due to what you put in there, which is this whole business of karma, and that what you put in there that's negative will bring you suffering, and what you put in there that's positive will bring you happiness. And because you want happiness and don't want suffering, you therefore abide by the laws of karma. Without appreciation of all that, all the rest of it's nonsense. So you've got to have it step by step. You just got to have it. You know, it's meaningless without it. And most vital, if it's true that Tantra, the approach is where you can utilize the junky parts of us, the delusions, the neuroses, the negative states of mind, the causes of suffering, that unless we understand the mind, which comes in the renunciation part, unless we understand Buddha's model of the mind, unless we understand what a virtuous state of mind is in its nature, its characteristics, how does it function, unless you can distinguish it from a negative state of mind, its characteristics, how does it function, how does it cause me suffering, not just a vague notion about it, but precise. Without this, it is all a nonsense. You can't possibly utilize attachment if you don't even know what it is. So it's all a joke unless you've got the three principal aspects of the path. So actually what we should be discussing is the three principal aspects of the path. We can't discuss Tantra. Sorry to disappoint you.
Well, we do have 4 hours.
Okay. Well, we did that. I mean, I forgot that we had 2 days, so I squashed it all in last night. So I've got to we'll unpack a bit today then. So were any of you not here last night? Oh, I see. There you go, you see. What's the point of doing 2 days if you turn up on the second day only? I'm not being rude. I probably am. Okay, well, who's here then? Who are you? Who wasn't here yesterday? Do you know anything about this at all? Did you come here?
Yes.
You come to the teachings?
Yes.
All of you come to the teachings here?
Yeah.
No.
Elsewhere.
Elsewhere. Okay. So all of you got some grounding in Buddhism?
Yes.
Yes? Okay. Good. Okay. Well, like I said last night too, Lama Yeshe happens to be my teacher, and was the founder of this centre and all the FPMT centres, and the Lama of Lama Zopa, who's our boss now. He, from the very beginning, like I said to you, and it was quite surprising actually, from the very beginning, quite against the usual approach, that is in the system in Tibet. he'd be telling us about Tantra from day one. And his logic behind this, it's actually very reasonable when we understand a little bit, is that because Tantra is all about utilising attachment, desire, attachment, he says because we're living in worldly terms, if we compare with Tibet, we're living in like this heaven of desire, you know, complete pure realm of desire. We're dripping in it. We've got this really sophisticated minds, intellectually sophisticated minds. We know all about attachment, because the attachment and the sophistication together, including the intellectual cleverness, we produced amazing attachment objects. We're brilliant at attachment, you know. Because one of the characteristics of attachment is a very clever mind. Now maybe this is something interesting. Let's talk about this, because we don't think of attachment like this. We just think of attachment as kind of greedy for chocolate cake, you know. But the more we understand Buddhist psychology, the more that means the more we understand the distinction between a so-called negative and so-called positive state of mind. And this is something that's unique to Buddhist psychology. Unique, really. Don't skim over it because you think the word attachment and anger and jealousy sound, oh yeah, I know them. We don't know them if we understand them from the Buddhist point of view. We really don't see them in the same way at all. And the key here, the key to understanding attachment, and therefore the mind, is to understand how all these states of mind that we experience from day to day are conceptually based. They actually are called concepts. A concept we know means a thought. Then when we hear anger and attachment, we find it very surprising to hear that that's a thought. That's a shock to us. We think of it as a feeling, an emotion. We're very, very, very caught up in that. We have feelings. We think thoughts are something that goes on in your head, and it's sort of like thinking about mathematics or something. That's called thoughts, you know. But actually, all our emotions come down to being thoughts. When we can begin to understand this, we can begin to understand attachment. Then we can begin to understand the meaning of transforming it and utilizing it. Until then, it has no meaning. It's a superstition. So let's look at how attachment finally is a series of thoughts, is concepts. Or anger, for that matter. Even more surprising to us. But the example I use is let's say someone who expresses their anger. You visualize a person like that. You know they're very loud. They're pouring out all these words out of their mouth. Their eyes are wide open. Maybe even the tears are coming. The blood is rushing. The heart is beating. She's angry. You'll say, because you can see the evidence of it with their body and speech. There's another one of you here, like that boy yesterday, killing 27 people in Connecticut. They said he was quiet, didn't like to be seen. Now, we can deduce from his action of killing 27 people that he must have had an angry mind, to say the least. But it's not what we think of as anger, you know. He didn't rant and rave around and shoot about, and he came and did this one thing. But obviously, in his mind has been growing and growing and growing and growing for God knows how many years. Angry thoughts, insanely angry thoughts. And this is immediately the point I'm making. If he wrote down every one of his thoughts, it would be a nightmare. It would be an absolute nightmare for us to read his thoughts. But you can hear the person who's angry. That's easy. We think that's anger, you know. That we say he has some personality disorder as if somehow something weird and different. It's just called anger, people. There's nothing surprising. It's called anger. So anger, when you think about it, especially an example like this, it's not expressed physically with his mouth and his hands every day. It certainly was yesterday. But if you wrote down all that, you'd have pages and pages and pages, would you not, of thoughts. It is so obvious. Anger finally comes down to being those thoughts. His hand would not shoot without there being thoughts in the mind. So the person who's shouting and yelling, you don't shout and yell things that aren't thoughts. It's sort of absolutely, it's a no-brainer, but because we're so used to thinking of anger as a feeling and an emotion, and then second, which is what throws us, we think, well, what caused it? What did my mother do to me? What did my father do to me? What did my boyfriend do to me? So they're all going to analyse this boy now, look back into the past events of his life to try and see what happened, why he was angry, because we truly believe in our culture, why he's angry is because his mummy did it, daddy did it, someone else did it to him. So we get lost in understanding it. The Buddhist idea is it's in the mind, it's a bunch of habits, and they're expressed conceptually. But the trouble is, the level of conceptuality that Buddhist psychology talks about is incredibly subtle. It's virtually, for us, for now, our minds are programmed to the level of instinct, with attachment thoughts, angry thoughts, jealous thoughts, depressed thoughts. That's why they're expressed as feelings, because feeling is the end result of the thoughts, not the other way around. You know, it's habitual. So your hand goes out there. Your words vomit out. It's because it's habitual, virtually instinctive. And why we can't hear these as thoughts, why we only notice this stuff and when it gets to the level of feeling, is because it's so instinctive and it's so habitual. We come fully programmed with all this stuff from the first second of conception. Fully programmed. What are they? Habits from having thought them and done them before. That's why to really understand Buddhist psychology, you've got to hypothesize continuity of consciousness. You've got to hypothesize, reincarnation. Mind being not physical and coming from before. Buddhism is a load of nonsense without this. It really is. It collapses into a heap of total absurdity. You've got to hypothesize it. We come fully programmed with all these instincts, virtually at the level of instinct. Because one of the simplest ways of understanding karma is its habit, which we understand. Every time you play piano, guess what you get better at? Piano. Well, every time you get angry, guess what you get better at? Anger. The habit goes deeper and deeper into your mind, until eventually we don't even notice it as thought. It's at the level of instinct, and then because it just arises and then it triggers feelings in our body, we then call it a feeling. It's very gross, and actually in the Buddhist view quite superstitious and quite mistaken interpretation, according to Buddhist psychology. So attachment, the bottom line. So effectively, for the Buddha, as far as in the Four Noble Truths, as far as he's concerned, effectively the main cause of our suffering day to day is attachment. Of course, as we understand Buddhist psychology, we've got to go to the deeper level, the most fundamental, primordial lie in the mind, misconception, called maripa, unawareness, ignorance, the fundamental delusion, the one that is the cause of all suffering, such that when we've seen the absence of the thing it grasps at, the inherent self, which is the seeing of emptiness, such that when we've seen that, it is annihilated. That's when we get out of samsara. But the root, in the hierarchy of delusions, and again, I have to repeat to you, you can't understand Tantra until we understand this, which is like high school, not even university. That's compassion. So, the hierarchy of the neurotic states of mind, which the Buddha would say are distinctly different from the virtuous or positive ones. And, as we know from Buddhist psychology, they're adventitious, which means they are not integral to your being. They're not fundamentally at the core of your being, which is the basis of all Buddhist practice. His whole point about nirvana, the cessation of suffering, and its causes, is based upon this view. His own observation that negativity, that the negative states of mind, psychologically speaking, negative states of mind, these misconceptions, these lies, these delusions, these afflictive emotions, these disturbing emotions, all these synonyms, they are not at the core of our being. This is the basis of all Buddhism, the basis of anything you do in Buddhism, is the ridding your mind of these things. So if that's true, like we've been talking, we have to understand them. And certainly we're going to want to understand Tantra, psychologically speaking, how we can transform negative parts of our mind into the path, as they say. We can't get that. It's a superstition and confusion until we understand this part about the mind, how all these negative states are conceptually based. So what it means is there is feeling, as we would call it in the West, emotion. But we only mean it at the level of when it hits the physical. And because in our culture we don't notice what we think and feel until it hits the physical. Because we don't posit a thing called the mind in the West, we only posit a thing called a brain. And because we think it's physical. So we don't notice anger and jealousy and love and fear and depression and anxiety and all the rest until it comes out the mouth. And of course that's why no one noticed that boy. No one could see his mind. We're not clairvoyant. Therefore you can't help him. Just think, poor boy. But now look what's happened, because he didn't know his own mind, doesn't understand he's got a mind, believes everything he thinks. No one sees his mind, there's no evidence of it. This is the suffering. So, the root delusion, negative state of mind, affliction, disturbing emotion, these are all synonyms. Neurosis, I think that's a nice word, I would have liked that, nice Greek word. Neurotic state of mind. The root of this, in this hierarchy, the fundamental lie in the mind, the misconception, the biggest misconception of all, the root of all the others, like I said, ignorance, simple word, precise definition though, ma-ripa, unawareness of what? The way things actually exist. This is the fundamental point of all the Buddha's teachings and wisdom. That this root delusion in the mind, which runs the show completely, is the cause of even why we get born in the first place. Why we even have a body, you know, is this maripa, this primordial, fundamentally ingrained, deeply instinctive belief, absolute belief in an intrinsic, inherent, real, self-existent me. These terms, real, inherent, self-existent, intrinsic me. The me existing from its own side, the me existing in and of itself. These are all synonyms for this mistaken sense of a self. And this is the root delusion, the cause of all suffering. On the basis of that root delusion, we then have the craving, the attachment to get what that I, which is a fantasy, wants. And that's the one effectively that Buddha says in Four Noble Truths is the main cause of our day-to-day suffering. And in fact, we live in a desire realm, as how Buddha defines this. And of course, all this is absolutely fundamental to understand Tantra, because Tantra is a way of utilising this desire realm and this body, which is a product of desire. The way it's made up, this very, like I said last night, the very sophisticated technical physiology of Tantra, which is the basis of the Tibetan medical system. The clear understanding of the subtle physiology, subtle psychology. All of that's based on what we're discussing here, which is in the Hinayana part of the path. Tantra is this marvellous way of understanding this subtle level of our being, our physical and mental being, and that is what is utilised in Tantra by the great yogis. So again, it's impossible to know that until you've done high school. We're talking high school here. Forget even emptiness and bodhicitta. We haven't even gone there yet. So okay, we have mind and we have a body. And Tantra's got this wonderful way of describing. For me it seems more simple even than the sutra explanation. This way of describing the intimate relationship between mental and physical. As Lama Zopa Rinpoche says, in the Kala Chakra Tantra, the word Tantra is used to refer to a type of practice and then indeed to a text that teaches that. So here we're talking about a text, the Kala Chakra Tantra, all the teachings. He says there are detailed descriptions in there about the very intimate relationship between the, as they say, internal and external energy. So internal means simply the mind. External is physical. And as far as the Buddhist view is concerned, which is exactly the same as Galileo and our lot back there in the Middle Ages used, it's made of the four elements. All of Tantra and the understanding is of all the great yogis and of all the practices is based upon this understanding of the mind, of the body, that it's made of the four elements: earth, air, fire, water. So in terms of karma, which is fundamental to understand too in order to understand Tantra, they talk about environmental karma, for example, 4 ways that our past actions ripen in the present. And the fourth one is that the actions we do in the past can ripen as experiences in relation to the 4 elements, have an impact upon it. That even these 4 elements are not existing from their own side. As Lama Zopa says, everything is our own karmic experience. So even the way we experience the 4 elements and how they manifest in front of us, the configuration of the elements into trees and moons and volcanoes and stars and this and that, beautiful and ugly and smelly and nice. This is also the result of karma. So as Lama Zopa Rinpoche says in the Kala Chakra Tantra, the detailed explanations of this intimate relationship between mental and physical, mind and body. Because these 4 elements here, in this body of ours, is exactly the same nature as the 4 elements out there in the trees and the rocks. What else do you think? This is the body, this is physical. It's the same as the universe, no difference. The difference is this piece of body here is imbued with a consciousness. It's the body of a person. A rock isn't the body of a person. There are trillions of sentient beings in the rock. Buddha would say there's not an atom of space you won't find sentient beings. There are trillions of sentient beings in this body here. You know, under your armpits, like a zoo, they say. Just your armpit, you know. The whole universe is pervaded by sentient beings. So, this intimate relationship between the internal and external, as Amazon says, it's like this. When the mind is negative, neurotic, grasping at these fantasies, which is what its job is, the negative state of mind, negative states of mind. Because of this intimate relationship between physical and mental, which I'll go into, the nice tantric explanation, then that impact upon the body, which in turn is what's called illness. And then in turn, karmically, over time, that impacts upon the external elements, which is then when you have eruptions of volcanoes and the yucky environment. Everything comes from the mind, finally, you know. So anyway, the thing I'm getting at here is this tantric model of the mind, which is extremely helpful to understand Tantra in this way we're discussing. And therefore, to help us understand attachment and the delusions and how they work. We have, according to Tantra, we have this model. We have gross consciousness, and that comes along inextricably linked with gross physical. In our case, this bag of bones here. You have eye consciousness, which is not physical, remember? Not your eyeball. There's that part of your mind, which is not physical, that functions through the medium of the eyeball to cognize certain things, shape, colour. So without the eyeball, you might have eye consciousness, but it can't work if it doesn't have an eyeball to function through. So they're inextricably linked. You can't have one without the other, but they're separate. This is the crucial point. Your eyeball isn't what looks. Your eye consciousness is what cognizes, but it needs the eyeball to function through. Tongue, taste consciousness needs the tongue. You know. Ear consciousness needs all the drum and the ears and the holes and the bits. Whatever. And they even talk about a subtler level of, form as well. So the gross level, mental and physical, the body and the mind, inextricably linked. And of course, that's all we posit as existing in our materialist world, isn't it? But then you've got subtle consciousness, and that too comes inextricably linked with subtle physical, or subtle body, they call it. And the components of that is what they work with in Tantra, and indeed the Tibetan medical system knows this well. And then we're made up subtly, physically, of the 72,000 subtle channels of our subtle nervous system. The wind energy, or the prana, that courses through those 72,000 channels. And this subtle liquid energy they call kundalini, red and white kundalini, or tigle in Tibetan. So it's this stuff and the subtle mind that the yogis are concerned with, because when they go into their meditation based on single point of concentration, that's the level of their mind they're going to. As Swami Yeshe says, Tantra is highly technical. The only time we ever touch that level of consciousness is when we dream, And then it's weird and strange and wacky and no one has any control over it. You can't go there at will. But the great yogis can go to their subtle mind every time, And there's obviously, clearly, a much more potent level of cognition that has much more power to cognize phenomena more clearly as they are. That is impossible at the gross level. Utterly impossible. The level of cognition that we're capable of at our gross conceptual and sensory level is really grotesquely gross in comparison with what we're capable of. But of course, as I said, it's all we posit in our materialist world. So limited. Then we have very subtle consciousness and very subtle physical energy, or body as they call it, utterly inextricably linked. And this is the subtlest level of a person. And this is what occurs at the time of death. And that very subtle consciousness inextricably linked with that very subtle wind energy, the four elements all subsumed down to the subtlest one, the wind energy. This is what leaves the body, programmed with all the past karmic imprints, and then programmed to go to a new birth and find its, move on to the next life. So you could say the point of one approach to all of Buddha's teachings is we're trying to rid the mind of the neuroses, okay? We're trying to rid the mind of the liars, the misconceptions. We're trying to rid the mind of these adventitious states that in the materialist view, utterly we believe they're normal. In fact, we think they're so normal you'd be abnormal if you didn't have them. Whereas Buddha says you don't need them. They're the source of all your suffering. And the job of all Buddhists from A to Z, whether you go to liberation or Buddhahood, you're ridding your mind of the delusions. So the only way you can do that is by getting to the subtle level. It's not possible at the gross level. It's impossible. So even at the ordinary sutra level, they utilize this technique that came from the Hindus, pre-Buddha. This techniques to achieve samadhi, as they call it. These techniques that enable us to get to the subtler, a subtler level of mind. No way as subtle as the techniques in Tantra enable a yogi to get to. But definitely more subtle in comparison with the gross level we live at. Get single-pointed concentration. It's only then you can begin to, no. It's only there where you really can get realization, because that level, a subtler level of mind in general, because it's gone beyond the gross conceptuality level, which is totally lying to us. It's there we can begin to, see the truth. We've got to access the microscope of our mind, in other words, to see reality. Because Buddha says right now we're living in lies. It's very literal what he's saying. So the sutra teachings, using in the first stages of practice, the Hinayana practices, using this single-pointed concentration technique, which the Hindus created. Buddha took it from the Hindus, from thousands of years of using it. And then he ran with that technique. That's fundamental to get anywhere. You can't begin to really get anywhere with your mind. You can't, not begin extreme. You can, of course you begin. You start where you are, which is right now, by controlling your body and speech. Then you begin to get some concentration. And you start at the conceptual level. We can do an immense amount of work at conceptual level, there's no doubt. Which then primes our mind to be able to get to the subtler level, using still even the sutra teaching, to get to a subtler level of consciousness, so we can begin to get, with some single-pointedness, strip away, see the lies, and then stop believing in them. Tantra, all it is, one way of saying, is a much more sophisticated, more powerful series of techniques that enable us to get the mind to an even more subtle level much more quickly. That's all. Not that's all. The point of all the teachings, we've got to get them, we're trying to rid the mind of the delusions. We can't do that at the gross level. We've got to go to a subtler level where we can see the lies. And Tantra is a very powerful, more speedy, more potent, sophisticated, advanced, whatever word you like, way of doing that. So as I said, Lama says, it's highly technical. Okay, so gross, subtle, very subtle. The great yogis who are able to, through their meditation, having done all the sutra practices, having got the bodhicitta, having got the emptiness, having got the renunciation, train, are able to, use deity yoga, for example, visualizing the deity, becoming the deity themselves, using all these methods that work beautifully together to help the mind go to this subtler level. They're able to go to that subtler level, training their mind to go to that subtler level. And that's where you practice, as I'm saying, getting rid of the delusions and practicing becoming yourself an enlightened being. It's a super tasty method for quickly becoming yourself an enlightened being, Okay, I'm going different points here. I'm so sorry, I'm getting a bit confused. Back to attachment. I want to go back to the states of mind. In order to do all these things, even just single-pointed concentration using the sutra practices, you've got to have harnessed your physical and mental energies. Forget the subtle gross business here. That's Tantra. Even at the sutra level. This is where if you have another packaging of teachings, you've got one called the 3 higher trainings. The third one is the accomplishment of wisdom. Wisdom means you've developed the ability to see emptiness. That's the wisdom we have to cultivate. The wisdom in our mind is a state of mind, that's what wisdom refers to, as a particular state of mind that is able to see directly emptiness, which we'll talk about. In order to have that wisdom, you've got to have the second of these 3, which is called single-pointed concentration. the meditation. You've got to go to the subtle level. You've got to. You can't do it at the gross level. In order to get the wisdom, you've got to have the second one, which is single point of concentration. Now, in order to get that one, you've got to have the first one, which is simply called the practice of morality. And that's where most of us are at. And that means controlling your body, speech and mind in the gross way, the obvious way, daily life. Living in your vows, practicing, doing your practices, controlling your body and speech. Then you can begin to get some concentration. Then you can begin to get wisdom. So everywhere you look, in Tantra, in the Sutra, everywhere you look, it's the same. You've got to have the ability, control your body, speech and mind, which is the first stage, which is the renunciation stage, in order to get to the concentration stage, in order to get the wisdom stage. And the same principles apply in Tantra, you know. So, okay, in order to do all this, you've got to understand the mind. You've got to understand, and that in order to understand the mind, you have to understand what a negative state is and what a positive one is. So one more component here is to try and get at all these bits and pieces to try to bring together. What Buddha's saying is, that, and this is just in the Sutra teachings, the mind in its nature, naturally, just how it is, when it's in a clear state, which means free of the pollution, when the delusions aren't rampant, even temporarily, the mind is naturally blissful. Again, this is a fundamental point in Buddha's teaching, his understanding of the mind. So, when you do single point of concentration in the sutra practices, you're training your mind to stop buying into and totally being engaged in all the gross chatter, the grossest of gross chatter, which is linked to this body. So the person who's got single point of concentration, which is immensely difficult, it's like reversing the energy of a bomb. When you even go to slightly more subtle levels, they describe it in terms of 9 stages. Even slightly, even to the 4th or 5th stage, already that person's begun to harness the berserk energy of the body and the speech and the mind. And thus are able to begin to taste this natural potential of the mind to be joyful, to be blissful. Don't misunderstand these words. It's very straightforward. You know. Extremely happy, in other words. It's the natural state of mind when the mind is unencumbered by delusions. Now, take this as a concept and you look at your own life. You wake up one morning, the extent to which you're not too attached, jealous, depressed, anxious, is naturally the extent to which you're fairly content, isn't it? Just naturally. Just naturally. It's the way the mind is. The extent to which you aren't so anxious, worried, jealous, depressed, fearful, is necessarily the extent to which you're fairly content. That's the way the mind is. And why we are not content 99% of the time is because our minds are overwhelmed by attachment, anger, fear, jealousy, depression, the default mode, the neuroses, the liars, all of which are misconceptions, all of which are fundamentally ingrained, instinctive feelings at the level of thought, instinctive. That's what runs our mind right now. So, as one of my friends, a very dear friend, a monk, a Swiss monk who's been meditating professionally, if you like, for like 35 years, off and on doing long retreats. I interviewed him back in '95 in Mandala magazine when I was the editor. And already he'd done years and years of retreats. And he talked about how one of his retreats up in Spain, at Ling, the place of clear light, the centre where Lama Yeshe's reincarnation, the Spanish boy, Ursel, was born in 1984. 85. And His Holiness Dalai Lama called it the place of clear light, Ling, this retreat centre up in the mountains out of Granada. So Rene practiced there. He said he was on an 18-month retreat doing single point of concentration. I remember, something like this. He said he maybe just touched upon the 5th of the 9 stages of single point of concentration in the Sutra teachings. A Hindu practice. And he said, and I'm really paraphrasing, and he said, no question, Robina, the joy, the bliss, whatever words he used, that I experienced was infinitely superior to any joy or bliss I experienced through my senses. At the gross level, in other words. So of course, when we understand, this is getting us to attachment, the way we are living at the grossest level, and where we buy into 1,000,000% the way things are, as they appear to us, our feelings, the world, the materialist view, we buy into it 1,000,000%. The only way we know how to trigger happiness is by getting an object, isn't it? Because why? That's the philosophy of our world, and that's the samsaric philosophy, that happiness is what you get when you get a nice object. So that's what attachment is, finally. One of the ways attachment functions is this bottomless pit of craving at the level of absolute assumption, based upon the deepest sense of dissatisfaction, which is the energetic level of attachment, which is what we're born with as a result of practicing attachment in the past. We get born with this deep sense of dissatisfaction, which then gives rise inevitably to the grosser level, which is the hankering after something, all of which is completely programmed in our mind as an absolute truth. That when I get that, then I'll get happy, then I'll get a good feeling. And that's what the samsaric world is, that's what this desire realm is all about. It's based on attachment. The 5 senses, what are they? 5 holes that need feeding, you know. They determine every choice we ever make, the grossest level. So because we have this gross sense of dissatisfaction, which is the habit of having attachment in the past life, you get born with this deep instinctive habit. It's a deep feeling of not having enough, not being enough. I am not enough. There is never enough. No matter what happens, I'm not enough. You can say the reason that boy went and shot 27 people, because he had profound dissatisfaction. A deep, pervasive sense of absolutely nothing being right, not having enough. So then when it doesn't, and so that gives rise, this craving to get what you want, and then you don't get it. That's what anger is. Anger is the response when attachment doesn't get what it wants. And attachment runs the show in daily life. This body is a product of attachment. This universe is a product of this disease called attachment. So, even temporarily, Rene, in his meditation, through his immense disciplined will, went beyond the insanity of the concepts, this massive, stuff that runs our show every second, that drags us from pillar to post. He was able to go beyond that, even temporarily, to just upon the 5th of the 9 stages in this particular retreat. So what he was doing was temporarily ceasing the grosser levels of all the chatter, all the dissatisfaction, all the drama, all the fears, all the panic, all the worries. Even just temporarily cease them. And what did he experience? His own true nature, as we say. His own mind. Peace. That's what peace means. It sounds boring, peace. Who wants peace? We want excitement, But peace meaning not dissatisfied. Peace meaning bliss. Bliss. Which means immense satisfaction. Sounds boring word, satisfaction. Like after you've stuffed yourself a cake, I'm satisfied. Not like that. Bliss is satisfaction. That is the natural state of our mind, Buddha says. Natural meaning is sort of you've temporarily removed the pollution. And that what you've got there is real mind. That's really what your mind is. That's who you really are. And that's just the beginning of the taste of it. That's the 5th of the 9 stages in the sutra practices. Well, the tantric practices are much more powerful and get you much more quickly to a deeper level where you can then quickly... So 2 things there. 2 things about the mind at this level. One is it's super blissful, and the other is it's super clear. Why is it clear? Clear meaning sharp. Meaning able to see truth. Why? Because it's not buying into the grotesqueness of the grossest of the gross delusions of ordinary daily life that we experience at the gross level of our body. Attachment, anger, pride, jealousy, all the stories they tell us, and all the ways they cause things to appear to us. Everything is our own karmic appearance. So that boy, his immense dissatisfaction, imprint from past killing. Get those 2 together, his immense attachment, his immense dissatisfaction, and then a highly developed conceptual mind, which is all what we've got in the West. You combine all these together, and then you have this insanity. And then he starts to believe every story in his own head. Everybody, we can all write our own novel every day, and everybody writes their own novel and says, that's the truth, that's the world, that's how it is. And that's the worst
as Lama Zopa says, bad enough we see the world the way we see it. Bad enough we interpret that person as good and this person as bad, or that boy, God knows what his interpretation was. We can deduce it from what he did. Bad enough that the world appeared to him that way. But the worst part is we believe it is true. So at the gross level, it's almost impossible to get past those appearances. You've got to get to a subtler level. And so one of the advantages of the subtler level is super blissful. And it's super sharp, because that's the level that can then do the deducing and the deconstructing of the nonsense to get to see the truth. So clearly, if we're trying to get our mind to a very blissful state, and Tantra is a marvellous technique based upon the understanding of the subtle physiology, based upon the understanding that we're in a desire realm, so it can utilise all these things, it's highly dangerous for a person who's not qualified, obviously. I mean, I've met so many people who have got some karma, obviously, from past practices, to quickly sit down and get very blissful. I mean, there's one woman I remember meeting, as soon as she did Tara practice, she got incredible bliss. She knew nothing about the Dharma. She wasn't interested in learning about the Dharma. She was like this vampire. She couldn't wait to meditate to get the bliss. And this is the tragedy, she thought that was spiritual. Well, just go have decent sex, please. It's much more fun. You can share it with somebody. Another boy, I remember Lama Zopa saying, during a Bodhisattva retreat, you'd see him over in the corner, he said, with his mouth hanging open, so caught up in his own bliss. So even doing sutra practices can be dangerous if you've got ability to concentrate, but you don't know what you're doing and where you're going with it. You go mad. That's why many people try spiritual practices, try meditating, and they lose the plot. They go crazy because they've got no idea about how their mind works. We're just greedy for pleasure. We're like vampires. Greedy, grasping vampires for a nice feeling. That's why the worst understanding of what spiritual means is all to do with these spiritual feelings. Really gross. And so Tantra, there are these super sophisticated techniques that enable the person who's qualified to access, to actually do practices that actively generate bliss. That's the purpose of them. Why? Real simple, like we've indicated even in sutra practices, because that bliss combined with concentration is like this rocket booster that gets the mind to a very subtle, the very subtle level, which is where you can deconstruct the nonsense and see truth. Become a Buddha very quickly. So like Lama Yeshe says, it's highly technical. So the only person who's qualified to do that is the person who's got some understanding of karma, deep understanding of karma, realizations of karma, which means renunciation, that their mind is not physical, that all their own actions are the cause of who they are, horrified at the thought of suffering, has got an understanding of emptiness, that there's nothing existing from its own side, it's all karmic appearance, it's all made up by my mind. And unbelievable, as Lama Zopa calls it, unbearable compassion for the suffering of sentient beings. Because that's the motivator. That's the reason you do these techniques. You've got to have emptiness and renunciation, but what makes you even want to do them has to be nothing less than bodhicitta. Otherwise it's just self-centered and the cause for insanity and hell, if you like, whatever you want. Insane. So it's logical when we think of it, Any questions? So we can go on somewhere to the next, take a little piece here. I want to go more into attachment. So any questions here, people, in general? Just general questions that might pop up since last night or since this? To clarify points, clarify words, clarify definition.
I guess the difference between, so you mentioned that the feelings are thoughts, right? So we have these,
Yeah, finally.
they
Yeah,
come
down to being
they
thoughts.
come down
Yeah.
to being thoughts. And so you were just mentioning now the people who maybe have these minds who can meditate or can concentrate single pointedly, but then they don't have the focus or the direction to go right away with it. They lost the plot, as you say. They don't, they go there for bliss, they go there for...
Yeah, they don't have the ability to understand that bliss and
Right.
see that as the goal, and therefore go nuts, don't know how to use
all
it.
they do is they crave it as, like I might crave, I don't know, beer
Something.
or chocolate.
Yeah, or you
whatever.
can, and also you could say, because you're going to a more, you're concentrating, the mind, which has got this junky stuff in it from God knows how many lives, comes rising up in all these crazy, uncontrolled thoughts. There's no ability to understand where all this is coming from. And the visions you see, if your mind goes to a slightly more subtle level, you see things that you can't at a gross level. So you just literally go mad. You go mad. People go mad because they don't understand, they're not ready for it.
Okay.
Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Because it opens, when your mind's even slightly more subtle, you're accessing your subconscious, if you like.
Yeah.
So that's all this hit, all the imprints from the past.
Right.
They're all going to fly up in front of you. You haven't got a clue what to do with it all. And you haven't really got a stability there.
Yeah.
Do you understand what I mean?
Yeah, no,
It's just even another example, because everything we come with into this life is from having done it before. We're programmed with all this stuff. So this boy, one of the main reasons, it's not just the videos he watches, it's not just his depressed personality, it's not just his mean mummy. He's got karmic imprint to kill. He wouldn't have done what he did if he didn't have the karmic tendency to kill. He couldn't have done what he did. He would have gone and done something else. He would have sat there being miserable for 40 years, like some people do. But he wouldn't have killed if he didn't have the karmic imprint. That's the first thing. So what I was saying here... Okay, sorry. I lost the plot there myself. Okay, yeah, so you've got to have done it before. So whether it's having meditated before, and you come into this life with some strong ability to concentrate, or you've killed before, so you come into this life with a habit to kill. Either way, it's the same. It's nothing special. It's just habit. So then I remember one guy at a course in Dharamsala years ago. He had this ability to, when he went to sleep, which meant he went to his subtle mind, because when you dream, when you sleep, you go to your subtle mind, subtle consciousness, just like we're talking Tantra. He had this ability to leave his body and go where he wanted, travel, astral travel as they call it in the West. This really fits comfortably and is explained easily by the Buddhist teachings. Now because he was addicted to this, he'd come to the class next morning exhausted. He's been around the world all night, Africa to his girlfriend, room in America. You knew it was correct what he was saying, because it fits with the Buddhist teachings, how it works. But because he was addicted to that, he had no understanding of the Lamrim. He wasn't interested in the Lamrim. This was boring, because he thought that was spiritual. So he was out of his brain, and he would go mad eventually, because he every night he would do this. And it was so exciting. And then he had all these, and then this is how attachment, you see, and what I want to get back to, what I mentioned before, this highly cultivated technical creativity that we are good at, actually that's a function of attachment, and I want to explain that. I will explain that, because that helps us understand how it's all thoughts. So he had this highly cultivated mind, developed mind, intellectually, this past karmic imprint. Then, of course, you elaborate. Oh, this must be so special. I must be so special. I can do this. That's the kind of way ego gets involved, where the people who can get bliss in their meditation. There's no controlling of ego. So they go berserk in their interpretation. I must be special. That's when you go mad, because you don't know how to interpret it. So you just go mad. He'd go mad eventually. He had no interest in hearing the teachings, because he just was convinced he was special. You understand what I'm saying? So everything we do is because of having done it before. So whether it's playing the piano like Mozart, concentration, clairvoyance, or killing. It's no special. It's not special. But of course, as soon as in our Western world, it's something that's called special, you think you're like a saint or something. But the reason you kill is the same reason too, because you did it before, dear. I'm sorry, nothing special. Anyway, there's that. There's that.
Yeah, I was just looking at clarifications between, since it all comes down to thoughts, and then, so then if you get down to a more subtle level of mind, then there's still thoughts that you're engaging in. It's just that if you have the correct understanding of emptiness and compassion and all the other things that go along with it, then you can direct those thoughts in productive ways. And
basically what you want, one way of talking.
Yeah, so as opposed to the people who have control over their minds, and then maybe it brings up all this junk, like
and no idea how to do it.
And then they don't know what to do with it. Whereas if you have the realizations of emptiness and bodhicitta, then you can take that stuff, work with it, get rid of it, and then you can start to purify all that, the negative aspects.
Well, even before, that's what we've got to do even before we get realization. Why we get realizations of emptiness is because of having done that work.
Okay.
You do all that work first,
Right.
yeah.
Okay.
And that's why we've got to have this deep, this clear understanding of the mind and how it works according to the Buddhist view, which is different from the West. So let's get back to that now and try and see how all the stuff, all our feelings, all our emotions, all our creativity are all coming down to conceptual, it being conceptual elaborations, as the Lamas call it. And how attachment is the function of our creativity. Creativity is attachment at work. So let me explain. One of the fundamental functions of a negative state of mind, which is a technical term for these neuroses. A neurotic state of mind, deluded state of mind, afflictive emotion, disturbing emotion, these are all synonyms for the neuroses, for the negative. In Buddhist psychology, there's positive states of mind, negative states of mind, and neutral. There's no fourth category in mental consciousness, okay? We've got sensory consciousness and we have mental consciousness. Let's even remind ourselves of the difference, and this is massive, and this is massive, crucial to understand in order to understand Tantra. The distinction between sensory and mental. Okay, this is really important. We have mental consciousness and we have sensory consciousness. So consciousness, remember, is a synonym for the word mind. It's not physical. Fundamental. That's your working hypothesis. Fundamental. It's yours. It's come from countless lives in the past. Programmed with whatever you've put into it, which is the meaning of karma. Simple. So, here we are, due to past virtue on the one hand, that, we got the human womb as opposed to the dog womb at the time of conception, immense amount of virtue, morality karma ripened at the time of our past death, even before we stopped breathing, due to having practice. And as Lama Zopa says, it has to have been practice in the context of a very strong spiritual practice, not even that, but practice in the context of keeping vows of morality, which gives power to the practice of morality, this conscious, intentional decision to not harm, not lie, not kill, not steal, and actively benefit others, as well as one's own spiritual practice. All this is this massive energy that then enables a virtuous karmic seed to ripen in your mind even before you stop breathing. That then programs your mind and will become what they call the throwing karma, that then will cause your consciousness, once it leaves the body and moves through the intermediate state, to find its way explicitly to in this case, our case, to our present mummy's human womb. We won the lottery. I mean, we didn't win the lottery, it was very conscious. But it's like miraculous, we got a human birth. So first of all, the virtue that gets us a human birth. Now we look at the bigger picture, we realise that the human birth, basically, we're born into a walking sewer. So from the perspective of what we're capable of, which is complete bliss, beyond bodies, enlightened mind, it's like living in the worst of the worst pigsties and thinking it's great. So our pigsty is nothing in comparison with the pigsty of being born as a dog or a hell being or a spirit. But we got the best of the available lot at the time of degenerate times. We got a human one. It's still a garbage body. I'm not being mean about it. Look at it. You open it up too much and you'd vomit and faint. It's quite smelly and revolting. So it is a walking sewer, and a very efficient one at that. But still it's that. In fact, they say, eons ago, before this human planet, remember time is beginningless for the Buddha, and therefore universes are beginningless because karma is beginningless, and because we all create our own realities. A human birth these realms of existence that Buddha talks about, human, animal, spirit, hell, God, all these, they're just mental states. They're just simply mental states that come along with a certain level of physicality. Remember the fundamental unit, the building blocks of this universe, minds and matter. Matter is the four elements, and minds are minds. And there's this intimate relationship between mind and matter, like we talked, as Lama Zopa said in Kalachakra Tantra. And the model of the mind, grows subtle, very, very subtle. Mind and matter have this inextricable link. So it's different levels of matter. There's very gross and there's very subtle. So eons ago, before this human planet, before this universe we occupy now, a human birth, as it was called, which is a state of mind, was very sophisticated, highly developed, and very subtle. It was like a God realm. The physical energies, the 4 elements, manifested as subtle light. And the mind was conjoined with that subtle light body. There was no gross delusions at all. There were no gross delusions, no attachment, no anger, therefore no pride, no jealousy, none of the gross stuff, and therefore no gross body, because they produce a body. So our human birth, we were much more subtle, and we could last 1,000 years and you could get enlightened very easily. So what happened over eons of time, because we go up and down in eons, and we're a very degenerate time right now, then, we began slowly, not we, because we weren't always human, but the human mind, it began becoming slightly grosser because gradually the imprints of attachment, which were there, hadn't been removed from the mind, would start to grow, it would pollute the wind energies, and each gradually getting grosser and grosser and grosser physical birth, until eventually the time comes along when a human birth now is, you're born on a planet looking like a bunch of apes. So it's really gross in comparison, So we're locked in these gross bodies. And so, of course, the senses completely run the show. We make the body the boss, as Lama Yeshe says. And in our materialist view is that that's all we are. That's the ultimate and the nihilistic view. We are only the physical. So the Buddha says we've got this bag of bones, this walking sewer, and our mind is kind of coursing through it. No wonder we can't cognize very much, So, because this is a desire realm, it's produced by attachment. How we get a new birth? You've got virtue that ripened. You're programmed to get another decent human birth, as opposed to the dog, in the backyard. You go through the bardo, and you're in the bardo, in this intermediate state, they say you're like this desperate craving to get another basis of another eye. The Robina's all gone. The memory of it's gone, but the grasping is still there, so strong. Frantically looking for another basis of another eye, because you haven't realised emptiness yet. Virtue's ripened. You're going to get a decent human birth. And eventually you see your new mummy and daddy. I saw my mummy and daddy in bed in about May 1944. There they were, doing their trip. Yeah, I was born 7 months later, you see. So in May, sometime in May 1944, mummy and daddy, Teddy and Billy, my mummy, Agnes Bliss, actually, her name was Agnes Bliss. I was called after my auntie, Robina Bliss. Then she married a Lithuanian, she became Robina Arkushauskas. We thought Bliss was a stupid name, and we thought it was a dumb name. It sounds silly to us, Bliss. Anyway, my mind ran like a magnet, and this is how they describe it in the Buddha's teachings. The energy that propelled me to my mother's womb, my mother and father's egg and sperm, was massive attachment, massive craving, wait for it, Freud would like this, to have sex with my father. Because that's the deepest attachment. You see, attachment in Buddhism, we talk about sexual attachment being some unique special trip. Excuse me, attachment is attachment is attachment. Whether you're attached to another body or putting chocolate mouth in the food, chocolate food in the mouth. It doesn't matter, it's a question of degree, that's all, Attachment is a craving for something. So this massive primordial craving for contact with a body is what causes us to even get born. My mind runs like a magnet to my father, and then because I'm just a little tiny nothing thing, the aversion, anger arises because the attachment doesn't get what it wants. That kills you in the bardo, and then you go zap, and Robina starts in the egg and sperm. So what a way to start, It's not some kind of special gift from God as we think about it. It's intense, it's motivated, it's propelled by attachment. Attachment causes you to get born. It's the cause of getting born. Attachment runs you to your daddy. If you're born a boy, they say you run to your mummy. That's what they say. So attachment is already there. So then you get the body, which is a product of attachment. It's an attachment object. 5 senses. In their nature, they crave objects. And what is this universe? Look at it. It's a bunch of 5 sense objects, basically, isn't it? So we're perpetually out there craving this external world. The cosmic joke, of course, is that we created it. This dualistic appearance of delicious things out there. As one Lama said, we're like children who draw a lion and then become afraid of it. Everything, Buddha says, is made by our mind. So there's appearance out there of delicious objects, ugly objects, nice. So we spend our lives craving the delicious ones, believing with absolute certainty when I get it I'll get happy, and then frantically trying to push away the bad ones, believing with absolute certainty that it'll be causing my suffering. That's how we spend life. That's samsara. It is attachment and aversion. This is the bottom line. So, the key function of all the neuroses, and it's so simple, and this is all you have to understand as concepts, is they embellish, they exaggerate. They exaggerate. So if, you've got a cup here, basically, and all this gets us down to emptiness now, and all this to do with how things exist. We've got a cup here. We call it a cup, conventionally speaking. You've got conventional and ultimate reality, okay? Conventional means you've got to say there is something. We have the label cup based upon this stuff out there. We say that's a cup. We all buy into that it's being a cup. Why? Because we've all decided it's a cup and it functions as a cup. So we say a cup is the flat bottom container that holds my tea. We made that definition. We created the cup. We buy into it, we all shake on it. That's a conventional reality. We agree upon it. We've kind of, all agreed, we call that a cup. And it functions as a cup. You've got to prove it is that. You put the tea in, and if it does hold it, which is its definition, then you can say it's a cup. Good enough. And that's how everything exists. We've made it already up, So out there is the physical, and we label it cup. And that's fine, but Buddha says we're not happy with that. We've got all these neuroses in the mind, starting with ego grasping, which is the main cause, then with attachment, then anger, then all the others. So basically we're seeing cup through the filter of our various projections, as we'd say in the West. So when I have my attachment glasses on, the cup will appear to me as very delicious. When I have my aversion glasses on, it'll appear to me as ugly. And of course, I just believe it is that. That's the function of the ego grasping. So the ego grasping, the marikpa, the ignorance, it's underpinning attachment and anger. And what it sees is a self-existent delicious cup, a self-existent ugly cup. So each of those delusions, 1, ignorance, the root one, 2, attachment, 3, aversion, 3 examples of negative states of mind, they all exaggerate something. They're all pointing to a thing that does exist, a cup, but not in the way we think it exists. As Lama says, when we've realized emptiness of the cup, and we've seen the true nature of the cup, and we've removed all the embellishments from our mind and see the cup as it is, he says it's as if there's no cup, but there is. But what does exist is so subtle, it's as if it's an illusion. This is now getting the two truths nicely together, not chucking the baby out of the bathwater thinking there's no cup, and not thinking, wow, there is a cup after all, where you reify it. So the key way that all the delusions function is that they are discussing something that does exist, but they embellish. They make it more than it really is. When we understand this, we can really get our head around Buddhist psychology. Are we communicating so far? Yes. So this is why you have to understand that attachment, for example, is a conceptual state of mind. It is basically defined as in our ordinary words, it's a description of a cup that exaggerates the deliciousness of it. Attachment exaggerates the deliciousness of something. Anger exaggerates the badness of something. So that means they're both stories. There are conceptual stories. So it exaggerates in a multitude of ways. For example, the bare bones attachment in my mind, when my eyes, get back to this. The eye consciousness first. Eye consciousness. This is get back to the back to the distinction now between sensory and mental. Fundamental. Look at this. I will look at that, my eyes will go over here and I'll look over there and I will go, and this is how I would go because its appearance to me is quite pleasant, I'll go, look at that pretty cup, I'll say. Now what we mean by that is that my eyes, which of course is what we think, are seeing a pretty cup. Wrong. Absolute nonsense. Eye consciousness is really like a dumb animal. It can only cognize 2 things, shape and colour. That's it. So all the rest, what's that? An elaborate story controlled by my mental consciousness. That's where all the happiness is stored, all the memories are stored, all the good, all the bad, all the descriptions, all the dramas, all the conceptualities, all the fantasies, all the nonsense, all in the mental consciousness. This is, eye consciousness is shape and colour, that's it. But what happens is, because we're really programmed in this for eons, in a millionth of a second, even quicker than Google, a million times quicker than Google, truly how our mind works, it will instantaneously, my seeing of this, without a millisecond of space, will trigger my mental consciousness. That's where the label, where I've got stored away in my memory, all my index cards in there, I've got the label cup. It comes up right there. I remember it. I don't have to go into Google, what is that cup? What's that thing? Round, flat, oh yeah, that's called a cup. No, I know it already. It's stored in there. My memory's quite good. So I rip up that little index card, pops up, cup. Then it'll come up blue, fish, and then because of my taste in things, it'll appear to me, because it suits my mind. So it will appear to my mind in general, not to my eyes, my mind, as a nice cup. And then simultaneously, it's attachment chatting away. Attachment sees a nice cup. Intelligence sees cup. Discrimination can say it's a cup, not a book. My eyes are working nicely, so I can say it's blue and white. I can see it's round. I've got all that tick, 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 tick all the boxes. I get all that correct. All those labels are correct. So I've got them stored away and I'm accurate. And then attachment comes in and takes over the whole experience simultaneously and says it's a nice cup. And then you go towards it, especially if it's my cup. And then it begins to elaborate that if I have my cup, that'll make me happy. That's why I cling to it. That's why then it triggers another lie, which is it's a permanent cup. It better be permanent because it makes me happy and I don't want to not have it. So all these lies are then made up in the mind. So this is an elaborate story. You'd write several pages of the stories, the elaborations of the different conceptual states of mind, all working beautifully hand in hand to have the mere experience of that cup. Are you kind of hearing what I'm saying, people? Mm-hmm. So, we're brilliant at this type of dissection when it comes to brains and chemicals and, because that's what we think it all is. So all these neuroscientists and neuro people are brilliant. But this is the kind of work you've got to do mentally. You've got to know your mind to this degree mentally. You've got to be sophisticated in your understanding of how the mind works mentally. Your thoughts. Are you hearing me, people? Yes. And you can't do this unless you study Buddhist psychology, because this is unique to Buddha. You won't hear this in psychology. I'm not saying you have to. You can use Jung if you like. We're talking Buddha here. These are all thoughts. They're all thoughts. But and now, okay. Let's say you're good at piano. You're really good at playing piano. You get incredible feeling from that music, don't you? Don't you? It triggers amazing feeling, doesn't it? Good feeling, blissful, all this stuff. Now, when you began playing piano, you didn't have that good feeling, did you? It was like a joke, wasn't it? You had to struggle to put the fingers on the right notes, and it was boring. You didn't want to practice your arpeggios. I want to be like Mozart, in the fantasy world, But look, in the beginning, it was really boring and painful. But as you got better technically, in other words, as you programmed your mind at music, then you technically becomes natural. So then you got space. And because of the habit, it triggers good feelings now. There's space for it. Well, look at anger. Why you have a strong feeling when anger arises is because you've practiced anger like you've practiced piano. You see what I'm saying? You've practiced it to perfection. You've practiced it so strong you come into this life, it's a second nature. And just like Mozart, when he saw music, he ran to it. Well, just like a person who's angry, you get something you don't like, and everything is just programmed, and the feeling explodes. Are you with me, people? Mm-hmm. Now, why that little boy, like the story I always tell, a little boy, a friend of mine, taking the lice out of his little boy's head. Her little boy's head, he's 3. He's crying with compassion for the lice. Why? We can deduce he must have practiced thinking and meditating on last life, practicing compassion, such that he just meets a louse in his own head and he's in tears of compassion. So the feeling is the indicator that you've practiced those thoughts until now they're perfect. So the feeling of loving music, it's come from hard work of filling your mind with technical thoughts. Is it not true? You see my point? Until eventually you've perfected it. And that's when the feeling can take over, the so-called intuition. That's all intuition is or instinct. All instinct is we've practiced it for so long, it now rises spontaneously. And of course we call that, like the deepest one, we call that instinct for survival in the West. Well, Buddha would call that ego grasping. He'd call that the root delusion. He'd call that ignorance. He'd call that maripa. The sense of self. The minute it's attacked, will rise like a sleeping lion and have a mental breakdown. That's why when you unpacked these delusions, seen through their lies, stopped believing in them, and eventually uprooted them, which means realizing emptiness. That's why when you realize emptiness, as Lama Zopa Rinpoche says, there is no fear. Because no longer are you living in the fantasy world. No longer are you buying into the lies of all these layers of misconceptions. Are we communicating here? Yes. Am I?
So one thing that I have a hard time understanding is when we're doing that unpacking, we're still doing it with our deluded mind. Okay?
No, you're not. You're doing it with your wisdom. You've got two lots of mind. You've got two lots of roommates in there. You've got virtues, intelligence, discrimination, clarity, joy. You've got these wonderful positive states of mind. That is what is doing the analysis, sweetheart.
Okay.
She's not I. We get caught up into the I am doing the analysis. No, be more precise, please.
Okay.
The wisdom within you is doing the analysis. If you can't access that wisdom, like that poor boy yesterday clearly could not access his wisdom, his kindness, his discrimination. He has it there. He was intelligent. But his delusions, the roommates of his delusions were so rampant, so totally bossing the show, his little wisdom was asleep. He couldn't hear it. Okay. So this is why we're sitting in this room, because we're exercising the virtuous roommates. Mm. They are what do the analysis, sweetheart.
Okay.
Do you see my point?
I do, yeah. And
this is crucial to understand.
I think, I guess I was thinking earlier in the week, we talked about that for the most part we're always seeing through our delusions, but it's good to know that we do have the capacity to...
Okay, put it this way. Put it this way. There's not a second we're not seeing things through the filter of ignorance, for example.
Right.
It's infesting everything we do. But we have to keep growing the wisdom and listening to the thoughts and understanding and learning not to believe in what's appearing to us. Then we can start to break it down. It's only when we realize emptiness that will stop. Attachment the same. Forget not doing something with attachment. But the more, that's why I like the idea of the roommates. They're going to be there for quite a while. Yeah. Until I realize emptiness, they won't be gone. But they get less and more quiet and more subdued, and the virtues get stronger and wiser and bigger, and they begin to run the household. Mm-hmm. You see what I'm saying? Yeah. The other guys are there, having their voice, but they're much weaker, and that's what we're trying to do in practice. Make the virtues stronger and stronger and stronger, so that they run the show eventually, even though the others are still there, polluting our mind. Okay. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's it's a gradual process, just like learning the piano. Mm-hmm. In the beginning, what's the status quo? Complete ignorance of music. Mm-hmm. You wouldn't have a clue. That's why it's so painful in the beginning to really struggle to the discipline of forcing yourself to play every day, forcing yourself to memorize that stuff and practice. But look what happens. The ignorance about music gets weaker, and the wisdom about music gets stronger until eventually it's spontaneous. That's exactly the same process. It's not miraculous, it's not special. Do you see?
Yep.
It's just hard work. Yep.
Hi, Rabina. In regards to impermanence and living in this desire realm, is it best then just to sort of move through life? Because I'm trying to think how to practically apply these things on my day-to-day.
That's right, you must.
So just if I were to approach things that, try to catch myself at the moment of attachment, just look at it more in terms of being impermanent.
We can apply any of these teachings. You can get your little kit bag of practices and apply whichever one is best. So like yesterday's teaching, yesterday's Connecticut business, yeah. You could learn, oh my God, you can think of impermanency. You can think of those little children. Just think that they could die today would be the biggest cosmic joke of all time. None of the mothers believed it because they weren't living in a war zone. There was no fear. Absolute certainty, as they all said, a perfect little postcard town. Everybody felt safe. So there was an absolute belief in utter permanence. So that's one of the most shocking teachings from there. And that's why much of the suffering. That's the first one. Then you think about karma, or then you think about compassion, or then you think about emptiness. Each one you can apply it according to what you want to think about. And every experience is the same, depending on which one you need most. If you really see yourself clinging very strongly, then maybe impermanence is the best, you know. Another time maybe compassion's better. Another time maybe karma is better. You take your little explanation and you, whichever one you need to learn at that time, you apply it. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, okay, thanks.
Why don't we have a tea break? Gone so quickly, look. Have a tea break. 15 minutes. And then chat away about all this stuff if you want to, or not if you don't want to. And we'll come back in 15 minutes, 20 minutes, but 15:15, yeah? Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.